Welcome to AWAI's Great Books Club with your host, Marcella, Allison.
I want to welcome everybody to AWAI's Great Books Club for June. Our book this month is Stephen King's On Writing, which is a fantastic memoir of his writing life and his personal life and how he finds his inspirations and how he is so prolific, which I don't think any of us could argue with, as a writer. And my guest this month is John Forde, who many of you know from his many years teaching at AWAI in various capacities. And John is joining us from Paris, right?
That's right.
That's my dream as a copywriter, to be saying, this is Marcella. I'll be joining you from Paris this evening. Or Rome, you know, I don't know. I just love that. You are the perfect vision of my vision of the writer's life, John. Like signing in from Paris. That's like my goal. And when I asked John to do this, we were thinking about books that we both liked and that we found a lot of inspiration from, and we picked Stephen King's On Writing. Welcome, John. I'm really glad that you can be here, and I'm really looking forward to digging through some of the ideas in this book with you and going a little deeper into some of the things that you had been talking about already in your newsletter. And I just want to make sure that folks know about that as well. John, to get that, they just go to the Copywriters Roundtable. Is that what you put into your search engine?
Right. It's copywritersroundtable.com, but if you just type Copywriters Roundtable in Google, it'll come up. And
because in addition to this call, you had a fantastic issue that you sent out about Stephen King, which is what a lot of the copy we're going to cover today, content we're going to talk about, came from that. So I thought we would kick things off just by talking about Stephen King a little bit. I mean, you know, I love that you said you're not a Stephen King fan. I am not a Stephen King fan either. I mean, the only other book besides this I have read of his is the book that the short story that The Shawshank Redemption was based on,
right.
Which I never would have guessed was Stephen King in a million years, right?
And
Green Mile.
Right. Well, you know, I think it's funny because I always say that I'm not a Stephen King fan, you know, and I think that I do it for the reason that a lot of people do it, which is that they think of these kinds of novels as not serious, et cetera, et cetera. But I love movies, and so many of his books were made into movies.
Right.
And they all have a certain good quality about them that must have come from Stephen King. So I think I have to refine my answer to that question. So I think a lot of the stuff, he certainly knows how to tell a story.
Oh, he does. He does. I don't know if you saw, maybe, I want to say 2 or 3 months ago, it might be longer than that. I'm turning 50 this week and I'm losing brain cells by the second. But thanks. There was a fantastic article in the New York Times about how the King family, Stephen and his wife Tabitha and their children, are the closest we have to writing royalty, meaning a family that's past, you know, like you have a musician who has 3 sons and they all turn out to be, you know, fantastic musicians or artists or whatever. And he said, you know, this is sort of the only example of a literary dynasty that we have is like everyone in their family writes. And what the kid said in this interview with that, and this relates to what you were saying about him being a good storyteller, was that at the dinner table, everyone had to tell stories. Like, that's what you did when you came to dinner was you had to have the best story, you know, about your day or about something that happened to you. And that it was almost like table manners, you know, weren't as important as necessarily, you know, coming to table with a story and knowing how to tell a story. And I thought there's something there about teaching that art, right? Like teaching your children how to tell a story and where that, you know, I think that's so cool.
It's funny. I mean, I don't know if, you know, storytelling is a universal kind of thing, but I mean, I grew up in a house of what you might call plastic patties. You know, we were all pretty proud of our Irish heritage, and that's that's kind of what you do, you know.
Of course.
Everybody sits around, they drink a little too much, and they tell a lot of stories, and you know, and it's a kind of a big thing. And we actually now with our kids, we have them, we have the story game, and you know, it's hard for them to have conversation when we sit around the dinner table. So I give them a scenario, and they make up a story about it, and they kind of like it.
Oh, I
love
it.
We do that on road trips and everything. So.
Oh, I think that's perfect. You know, I didn't come from an Irish family, but I came from a long line of farmers in the Midwest, and my grandmother had 7 sisters, and they would do what we call visiting, right? So they would all get together, and you'd all be sitting in the living room, and this was long before anybody had air conditioners, right? So you'd have the circulating fan going on, and they would be telling stories either about when they grew up or when they first moved to Indiana or life on the farm when they were younger, or I remember my grandmother telling the story of rural electrification and watching the electric lines come across the prairie and, you know, wondering when your house was going to be next. And so that, I guess the Midwest Protestant version is visiting or visitin'.
Right. Well, you know, in the book, I liked how, you know, I read that issue that I wrote of the Copywriters Roundtable about this, I wrote in 2004, and I had read it back then, and I'd actually forgotten a lot about it. But what I remembered liking about it was that it was a writing book that had this big chunk in the beginning that wasn't about writing at all, but really about how he grew up and what his family life was like, and a lot of weird stories and things like that. And the first time I read it, I thought, oh, you know, it's just a guy having a good time with a writing book because he can pretty much write whatever he wants and they'll publish it. But I reread it again, and I really think that, you know, one of the first things we're gonna talk about in just a minute is about writing honestly, and I really think that his setting up that scenario about his life and this kind of, if you don't mind me saying, I'll just say it in the spirit of the book, no bullshit kind of approach, where he just kind of told it like it was, whether it was embarrassing or whatever. He was completely transparent about it, and that really made a lot of what he said after that much more credible, because you could hear about his background. Right.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I noticed was I had the same experience, two things I noticed. One was when I was thinking back to the book, the things I remembered the most were either lines or descriptions or stories within the book. So I thought that was interesting, right? The power of a story, that's what I'm going to remember. And the other thing I noticed when I went back this time was some of the amazing ways that he uses description and how he uses all the senses. So I remember when he's talking about having his eardrums pierced, you know, when he's a kid because he gets the infection in his eardrums.
Right.
He's describing the pain, then he's describing the smell of the alcohol swab, right, and how to this day, like the smell of that antiseptic swab, like makes his heart race. And then I love where he describes the scream he lets out when they puncture the eardrum, and he says, I think that scream is still going on somewhere in my unconscious to this day, right?
Sure, it explains his subject matter in just about all his books.
And it's just, I thought, wow, I mean, it's a great example of how he uses description, but not just visual. There's touch, there's seeing, there's the smelling, there's, you know, the scream that he's hearing. And I think when I went back, I'm like, that's part of what makes him such an amazing storyteller, and it's part of what makes us all better copywriters. And I know we're going to talk about that, but is that ability to not only tell a story, but tell a story with such vividness, honesty, description that you just fall into it like jumping into the warm ocean. You just have to go there, you know?
Right.
Let's kick this off by go ahead.
And often without a plan, which I think is a big theme in this book. That's interesting, isn't it? He doesn't map these out, does he? No, he doesn't map those out. And when he gives those descriptions and tells those stories, it doesn't feel like he is doing that because he's trying to make something happen. He's just simply telling them, and they come out, and he's almost discovering, hey, this actually kind of fits what I wanted to say anyway, and then he gets into it. So that's an interesting
comes
thing.
Around at the end. Yeah, he kind of brings it all back together at the end of the story, and he's like, so that's why, whatever.
Right.
That's interesting when you think about copywriting, because I think some of the copy, and I know you critique a lot of copy. I don't critique anywhere near as much as you do, but when I'm working with writers, you can tell when someone's forcing the hand, when they're trying to drive. It just doesn't quite feel right, even if they're doing all the right things. But when someone has sort of a natural voice that they're just letting it evolve, I don't get as suspicious, or it doesn't feel as hacked or as stiff, I think. And David, when he critiques me, when I work with David Deutsch, when I'm stuck in that sort of rote place, he'll say, you're writing like a researcher, you're writing like a teacher now. Just tell me like you tell me. Tell me like you tell me. Stop that,
Right.
And I think that's what he's trying to say to me. Stop trying to map this all out and make sure I get all the facts and the data. Just tell me,
Right. Yeah, I heard somebody say recently a phrase that I thought was a good way to put it. And he was talking to other copywriters, and he said, don't let the writing get in the way of the thinking.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
I could see that. One thing David has me do that helps is I'm so left-brained that the first draft I've usually constructed like I would lay out a legal brief,
Right.
my arguments. And then he actually, and part of it is because you have to footnote everything, so I'm like trying to do 5 things in my brain at the same time, left brain and right brain things.
Right.
So
Well, there's actually a quote that fits that later, so I think we should come back to that.
Oh, good. So let's go ahead.
You wanted to jump on this slide here. So when you find something at which you're talented, you do it until your fingers bleed or your eyes are ready to fall out of your head. It's funny, that I guess Nan picked these pictures, and it's funny that picture reminds me of not the very first copywriting office I was in, but a copywriting office that I used to be in. And it was in a building in Baltimore, really tiny, no dog, but no space either, and stuff all over the place just like this. And I used to go up, and it was in the top floor, upper back corner of this building. So I could go all day and see nobody. And I had a door a door that opened and banged into some of the furniture and things like that. And I would, to plan out, it's funny because we were talking about planning out writing, I would plan out the writing on index cards because I just was trying to get I would take notes on the index cards and I'd lay them out to try and figure out where the thing was supposed to go, what to keep, what to get rid of, and I just kind of I'd keep laying it out and rebuilding it out. It's kind of like storyboards that people do for a movie. Right. But I didn't have any space. I had a floor about as big as is in that office in the picture, and I would spread the index cards out on the floor. But I was early 20s and single, and it was like maybe a Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. I wasn't going to go anywhere, so I was there in the office till about 10 o'clock, 10:30, and this guy, I would just completely lose track of time. I'd just be kind of like lost in the stuff was on the floor. Right. And the only person left in the building was this guy, Joe, who's passed away now, but he was the custodian of the building. And he'd go around shutting off all the lights and everything. And I would be there on the floor, and he would open the door, and it would bang into me. And he would be going in to turn off the lights. But he would bang into me, and I would say, wait, and he'd say, who's there? And I'd have to wait. And I was like, it's me. And he'd like, what are you doing? And he'd open the door to see, and he'd just keep hitting me in the back with the door. And I couldn't let him open it because the cards were on the floor. But it was just kind of embarrassing to lean out of the crack and try to explain out what was happening. But it did remind me of that idea that when it really, I think it never goes away that you get out of this thing where you're, when you're the writing life, whether it's copywriting or novel writing, whatever, it never really stops. That's one of the reasons that it's so difficult to be partnered with a writer because
there's no off days.
You can't stop working on it. You're waking up and writing notes on a pad, and you're working late on it, and you're reading stuff. And then when somebody interrupts you, you're really irritable because they break that chain.
Yeah.
But that quote really reminded me of that thing that you have to put in that time at some time, because you're just not going to discover it. You just don't know what moment it is that you're going to have that breakthrough.
I agree, and I think this idea, what I love about him is the way he approaches writing. I use this phrase as if he was telling you how to plumb a sink. In other words, he doesn't have that affectation of, I'm a writer, I have to wait till inspiration finds me.
Right.
You know, he's like, if you're good at this, you have to do it, right, until your finger bleeds red, meaning it requires the sweat and the work. This is not a man who wanders around smelling daisies until he has a thought and then jots that down. You know, this is someone who is in the office, like you said, till 10 at night, at 7 in the morning, writing. And I think I like that marriage of talent and work that he really, to me, exemplifies. Because one without the other, you don't get very far. I think you do need both.
You want to move to the, what do we have next here?
So now we're going to talk about writing honestly, which you mentioned a little bit earlier. So he says, liars prosper, no question about it, but only in the grand sweep of things, never in the jungles of actual composition. If you begin to lie about what you know and feel while you're down there, everything falls down.
Yeah,
and I think
this, well, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, do you want to go through the other two, or do you want to stop at this one for a little bit? Why don't we just, let me read the other two, and then
Okay, read the other two, and we can just sort of cover them all at once.
Yeah, I like that. Actually, why don't you take these since I took the other one? You have such a good radio voice.
I do. What would be very wrong would be to turn away from what you know and like in favor of things you believe will impress your friends, relatives, and writing circle colleagues. The job is to find truth inside a web of lies, not commit intellectual dishonesty in a hunt for the buck. Also, brothers and sisters, it doesn't work.
I love that. I love that idea. So tell me a little bit about what you mean when you talk about writing honestly.
Well, I think it actually means a few things. You know, I think when I had written that issue of the Copywriters Roundtable, I had said that the writing honestly we were talking about was not about ethics, although ethics are, especially in copywriting, because you're selling a product.
Right.
I don't know many people, or really any people, I think, who are interested in selling crap. So if you're selling something that's not good, it's very hard to sell something that's not good and be happy about it. You know, you think of that like a car salesman. Car salesman, I always say, like a cheap suit and car salesman, a guy who comes up and schmoozes you. That guy, you can tell he doesn't believe anything about that car any more than you do, and that's why he's so
smarmy.
Annoying. So smarmy is a good word. So I mean, I guess one of that, just to get the most obvious part out of the way, is that, and this is a Gary Bencivenga thing too, where he used to say that a great product is more powerful than a mighty pen. It's just easier to stuff that's good. You know, sell good stuff and you'll be okay.
And it's so much easier to write about good stuff.
Right. But I think that makes a leap closer to the other way I think that you can think of this, which is you have to be writing about stuff that you actually have an interest in, as well as believe in. So, for instance, and I've been doing this now for 23 years or something. In that time, I did write for a while. I've written for mostly financial products, but I've written for a water filter and a financial fund and a whole bunch of supplements and a few other some charities and things like that. But the supplement thing has always been difficult for me. You know, I run into guys like Clayton and Lee Euler and some other people. I don't know if you guys know who Lee is. He kind of keeps a low profile, but he's a great writer. And Don Mahoney when he was around, and those guys were all talking about how great it is to write in the supplement area. There's so much stuff to do in there. And I think that anybody can make that work is great. but I'm cursed because it's just not my thing. When I was writing stuff about supplement things, I found I would work at the office, and then I just remember one time going to a health food store to do a little bit more research. And there were these two people in there who were talking about how they were on day 3 or day 4 of their fast, and they both looked like they were going to die. And I just thought, this is not, I just can't believe in that. And I couldn't write about it credibly. I just couldn't be honest about it. So I think I drove to Wendy's and ate a double-sized fast food dinner or something. I just couldn't do it.
You know, it's a really good point, because I love writing for the supplement market, but I think it's because I have an incurable autoimmune condition for which traditional medicine has absolutely nothing to offer, and the few things they do have to offer have miserable side effects that destroy my life. And I was diagnosed with this when I was very young. I was in my 20s. And so I had to, become my own researcher, right? Like, I had to, go on blogs and talk to people and find out what would work and try different supplements. And then that tapped into my deeper rage, so how come my doctors can only tell me about the drugs with the nasty side effects that don't even reduce my symptoms, but they don't know about any of this other stuff that works? And where's the FDA come into that? And you're right, because when even if I'm not writing about a supplement for my particular autoimmune disorder, if I'm writing about any supplements, I have this sort of history and memory. I have this experience of what it felt like to be told, I'm sorry, we have no cure. There's nothing I can do for you. You're just going to have to be miserable and in pain for the rest of your life. And I was 21. I just remember sitting there sobbing. And I thought, so for me, it's fueled by this idea that never again should some 21-year-old have to sit in a chair and be told her life's over and you'll just have to be in chronic pain for the rest of your life. There's nothing we can do for you. And so I can write to that, but it's because it's my truth, right? And it comes out of a whole 20 years of my life. And I think that that's the essence of your point, which is, find what you love and what you know, and then writing honestly about it is as simple as being true to what you know, right?
Right. Well, and I think that's, what Stephen King says, that also brothers and sisters, it doesn't work. That's what he means, is that you can't fake that. Part of it, we talk about in copywriting that the big thing is about building trust, about building relationships, and relationships are always built on some level of trust.
Right.
For Stephen King in fiction, it's the same thing. If there's always this expression people talk about when they talk about movies or fiction, that this willing suspension of disbelief. That phrase has always bothered me because, in my opinion, it's like saying the reader owes it to me to suspend their disbelief.
And let me spin the table.
But what it really, even though that's not quite what they mean, what the responsibility really should be for the writer to give that person who's reading it a context in which their disbelief is forgotten. It has to be so convincing, and the absolute best way to make that convincing, and this goes back to the Gary Bensathanga point, is to write about something you believe in so much that the writing is authentic. So
I do think there's a one-off position, though. I will argue just a little bit with this, which is when I first started writing, I was writing for option traders, and I did not trade options. I still don't trade options. But
it was Bernie something, right?
I was working for Bernie Schaefer's office.
Bernie Schaefer. I almost said Bernie Sanders, but I don't think that was it.
But what I found is, because I loved entrepreneurs and I loved working with sort of self-made businessmen, and these option traders, when I first started writing, were sort of like, they were like the cowboys, right? Like, they weren't like any stock trader I'd ever talked to, and the things they talked about weren't like the things that stock traders talk about. And I just found them fascinating, and they were passionate about what they did, and they loved what they did. And so even though I wasn't actually doing that, it wasn't my story, because I was sitting surrounded by 10 of them doing it all day long, I could talk to them, I could channel their voices, I could get excited, I could start to understand So I think I'll just twist it and say either you have to have that truth or you have to be working that closely and be excited. Like, they got me excited about options trading. They got me to think it was pretty cool and fun, and I loved the way they talked about it and the mystery and the pursuit of the great trade and everything. So maybe, you know, if you're writing in an area where it's not necessarily something you know, I think you can get to know it and you can get to love it if you've got really good people around you and if you're just excited about learning about things in life in general, too.
Well, you know, that last bit, I think, is the most important part. There's in Ogilvy on advertising, there's a thing where he talks about what the most important the most important trait is for hiring a copywriter. And, you know, we sat around and talked about this all the time. I mean, I meet a surprising number of copywriters who play an instrument.
That's interesting.
Surprising number of copywriters who have a good sense of humor, and are usually pretty easygoing, and also probably drink a little too much. All those
Which
all
is
those
true of
things.
all writers, not just copywriters, right?
Right, but the one thing that Ogilvy said is very important is that they have to have a very strong sense of curiosity. And you know, I think, you know, you get a good writer, they can be curious about anything. They can be interested in learning about anything. They're often the people that will sit there talking to somebody that other people in the room are thinking like, oh, I don't want to talk to that person, because they find an angle on it that's exciting. I mean, for me in the health field, I love the science of the health field, but the only reason it doesn't work for me is because I also find conventional medicine and the technology of medicine and biosciences and things, that to me is also fascinating. So, and for a long time there, not necessarily anymore, but for a long time there in the alternative health world, that was countering that world. So I just couldn't get, couldn't get into it. Not that it wasn't that it was wrong. It was just that I had a battle with another kind of curiosity. But for the most part, I think that's true. If you're very curious, you can find your way into,
and I think that's a perfect segue to the next sort of lesson that we can take from King, which is never stop learning. And for him, that's really epitomized by, I use that
reading.
word right? By reading, which I love. And he says, I love this fact, which I think Nan found online for us, that his personal library is over 17,000 books. I mean, clearly here is a voracious reader, right? And I loved this one. If you want to be a writer, you must do two things above all others: read a lot and write a lot. There is no way around these two things that I'm aware of. No shortcuts.
Right. Well, I don't know if you've ever read Freakonomics, but they have that point that they're in there, that they found that people who do better in school and do better in life, as well as higher incomes and things like that, and don't end up in prison, their parents tend to have a lot of books. But they said you couldn't say, is it because the parents read them the books, or that they were big readers, or that their parents were a certain kind of person that buys a lot of books. You don't know which way it goes. But there definitely is something about reading. I've only met one great writer, copywriter, that says he doesn't read, and that's Paul Hollingshead. And I think he was joking. I mean, he was a journalist, and so he clearly wrote a lot, and his brother is a famous novelist, so and then he ended up talking about some books, so I think he was faking. But this whole idea of the reading all the time, this is I was talking about that time in the office, staying until 10:30. I also remembered, when I look back on it, my social life must have been dismal by observers. But I found a bunch of audio books from a lot of copywriters, and I had books by copywriters, and then I started reading books about the stuff I was writing about in the financial field. But I would have audio books playing in my car all the time, in my apartment all the time. I didn't have a TV for 8 years, so I would put them on and sit there and eat dinner and listen. How sad is that? But I mean, constantly fill time with all those things. because I felt like not that all of it was perfect, but that somewhere in there was going to be some kind of gem.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I love this idea too that I mean, you can imagine if he has over 17,000 books, they're probably not all horror novels. You know what I mean? This idea of
right. Well, he talks in the books.
You know?
He talks about Eudora Welty and Hemingway and Fitzgerald and all those other people. So.
And I think, you know, for a while, my mentors and I had this list going of types, like we read all types of books, and we always fire, and I don't know if you do this with the folks that you work with, but as soon as you find a gem or something that you think is, you know, interesting, then we fire off an email. Have you read, you know, such and such?
Right.
And, you know, this is why you would really like it, and you should check this out. And we had this list of books, and Paris has a name for it. I don't remember what the word is, but it's basically, it's like memoirs or autobiographies about like a thing that you really want to learn about. So like, you know, that like gets you really on the inside of something. So we had Kitchen Confidential in there because it's Anthony Bourdain like telling you what it's like in the underbelly, right, of the New York restaurant world. And so we would find books like that, and I'd say, oh, there's another one to add to that list. You know, did you read such and so? And so you would just drop into some industry, like in that example, it's the restaurant world, and it's just fascinating. You're learning, it's a new thing that you don't know about. You're learning a lot about it, but you're also like expanding all that knowledge that floats around in your brain. And when they talk about creativity being the coming together of two separate parts, you got to have enough ingredients in the soup for two things to find each other. You know what I mean?
That's right. Yeah, there's going to be a little synapse between them, and you don't know where that's going to happen.
And if you got more ingredients, there's a bigger possibility.
Yeah, and it's important to note that reading, that means reading very widely. You know, you can't read all copywriting books. In fact, I don't read any copywriting books anymore. But you can't read all self-help books or sociology books, or it's got to be something wide.
Let's talk about his this last quote in this section on description, which we talked about a little bit when I kicked it off, and I said, you know, the thing that I notice the most when I can pull myself one level above the story to actually look at the writing of it. Good description is a learned skill, one of the prime reasons why you cannot succeed unless you read a lot and write a lot. It's not just a question of how to, you see, it's also a question of how much to. Reading will help you answer how much, and only reams of writing will help you with the how. You can learn only by doing. And so he's both reading and writing. And I know we're going to talk a little bit later about discipline, but he's prolific at both. He both writes constantly and he reads constantly. I don't know. There's a book that I'm reading right now. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called The Practicing Mind. And it's by a guy whose name, of course, I can't remember now that we're live on the call. It's by a guy who's he tunes pianos for really famous symphonies and, you know, like leading performers. Like he's the person that you want to tune your grand piano before the performance. And he talks about how monotonous it can be and how you want to just, you know, beat your head against the wall. But he's also talking about how he grounds himself in the doing of it by staying present to it, right? And to me, when you're talking, what he talks about is like, we don't have the patience to practice anymore. And he's talking, of course, about musicians, but he's like, it's true of anything. No, none of these great musicians that he prepares this for, none of them just sit down and do that. They practice for hours every day. And he practices for hours every day on the exact way to tune the piano. And he's also a musician, so he's practicing as a musician. So this idea that you could just sit down and write without the practice is baloney.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I'm thinking a bunch. I know we get caught up on some of these things. I'm thinking of a bunch of stories here and restraining them. But somebody told me about. Oh,
give me a story. We always go over, and even if we don't, we'll just fill this with good stories. We're fine.
Well, I'm gonna tell you a couple of them. But one is about the music thing. You remember Tom Hickling? You knew Tom?
Yes.
Yeah, Tom.
I did not know Tom, but I knew of Tom.
So Tom used a great copywriter and a guitar player, and he used to talk about this guy that he met, was a jazz musician who could just play these amazingly fast licks. And he's playing in a bar somewhere in Baltimore, and not famous, but his talent was just immense. And he would do these fast licks and perfectly timed and everything. And Tom said, "How do you do that? How do you?" And he said, "I know you practice, but how did you practice?" And he said, "I would just play it as slow as possible. That was I would play it as slow as possible, and when I could play it really slow without a mistake, I'd play it a little faster, and then I would do that and then play a little faster and a little faster and a little faster." I think the thing about this writing thing, this figuring out the how to, how much to, and all that stuff, which kind of sounds like a sense that you have to develop, so that you go, "Oh, this is too much. I can't tell you why, but I just know it feels like it's too much."
Right.
And how you need to read a lot, and you need to write a lot. I think you can combine all that, and it's a little bit like the jazz guy, and it's a big piece of the advice that's in the AWAI copywriting book, which is to sit down and take a piece that works and to write it out by hand
copy,
and just copy it out. And if you feel like your elbow hurts too much to do that, then at least do a reverse outline where you say, okay, this headline has 10 words and it's got it's a big promise and with this one idea, and the subheadline has this many lines in a small paragraph, and the first line is 8 words and it gives a shocking image. And you go through that and figure out that structure. I mean, that sounds very mechanical. It sounds maybe a little tedious. But what you can pick up by doing that is, I remember doing that with an O. Henry short story, and I was writing it out. And I was finished, and I felt like I had a sense of how to tell that story better, far better than I did when I started. But I couldn't remember how I learned it. It became osmosis.
Becomes intuitive. And I think when I first started working with Paris, he had me hand copy something like, I think there had to be almost 600 bullets from leading boardroom packages, right?
Right.
So, those are those little fascinations or teasers. It's really like a headline, right? Is basically what it is. But by the time I finished with the 700 of them, it was like part of my sinew or whatever, part of my bones, because then I could look at something and I had all these sort of like formulas and structures in my head, and I'd be like, oh, I could put this idea in this format or that format or this, and I did the same thing with sidebars. When I had to learn to do sidebars, I copied them all by hand. And I think that the structure then became something I understood, and I don't know how you get there if you don't spend the time studying it.
Right.
I'm just get there.
Just a couple more things. I used to aspire to be a novelist myself. So before I started doing this copywriting thing, I used to keep a piece of paper on the wall, and even when I had started writing copy, I'd keep a piece of paper on the wall, a big piece of paper, and I would read books, and if I found a passage that I just loved the way it sounded, I would write that passage on the wall and just a dash, what page it was from and which book it was from. And I would try and fill the paper, and then I would take, when the paper was full, I'd take that down and I'd put some other ones up. Really just because I loved the passage so much, I wanted to go and read it. But in a copywriting sense, I find I realized, actually just now as I'm saying this, that I kind of do that now, that I have favorite promotions that other people have written. And when I'm feeling kind of slow and bogged down and not sure what to do, I open up one of the other promotions and I just start reading it.
Yeah,
and at some point I just kind of get into it just carries me into the same language that I want to try and use in the copy.
Right, you get your melody back. My twist on that is I keep a current promotion that I'm copying and just a spiral-bound notebook and a pen in the reading chair in my office. And what I do when I'm feeling stuck is I sit down and I'll handwrite maybe a page or two in the, it's just an 8.5 by 11 notebook. When I'm done, it's really just practice. It's like scales on a on the piano. I'm not really performing a concert. I'm not, but it somehow it gets me, like, just like you said, back into the flow of things.
Right. Well,
and I think,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think this idea of practice, one of the things he talks about in the book that I find really interesting is how we have made practice a negative thing instead of a positive thing. We've made it painful. We've made it drudgery. And what he says when he's talking about this piano tuning thing, what he says is, when he's talking about the practicing mind, he's saying part of it is slowing down, which is why I loved your example of doing something very slowly and noticing. Like, because if you're slow and you're really paying attention, you don't get bored. You start noticing things.
Right.
And I think that's, I love this quote, bliss out or don't bother. If you think of all of this as a chore, you're going to be miserable. You can't.
This reference in the book is about how he tried to get his son to play the saxophone, and he got him a saxophone. They went to see Bruce Springsteen. And and Clarence Clemens was there. I grew up in Philadelphia, and Springsteen was God my entire childhood, and
of course.
But it's interesting because it connects to one last thing I wanted to say. You don't have to go back, but one last thing I wanted to say on that last point that kind of runs into this one. My wife is kind of a what is it called? She's I don't want to say a sergeant, but she's hard driving on getting the kids to do their stuff and and work on their skills.
She runs a tight ship, as my grandmother.
She runs a tight ship. So with our daughter and her piano practice, and right now our son is 11, and she wants him. We're here in France. She wants him to be able to write well and read well in French, but we also really don't want them to lose their chance to learn English. So she has our son write a journal every day. And he writes a journal entry. This is kind of like from a discussion that we had about the book, A River Runs Through It. Did you ever read that?
Oh, I love that book.
In that book, one of the things that the father of the writer did was make them sit down every Saturday and do some writing. So our son Michael does the journal entries, and then he brings them to me, and we look them over, and I correct spelling mistakes and give him clues. But I try and do it in a very supportive way. I'm like, oh, this is a really good line, and this is almost perfect, except when you bought something and has a GH in it, and things that he's not going to pick up in a French school, And he then when he's done, and he, for him, it's like scoring points to get through as many words as he can without a mistake. So he's very competitive about it. He's like, I'll start to tell him what it is, and he'll say, wait, and he'll grab the pen, and he's like, don't tell me, and then he'll guess.
Oh, I love it.
And then he copies it back into another. He has a second book where he copies it back without the mistakes. And we started this because his spelling was as bad as any other French kid's spelling would be in English. But in just 3 weeks, he has dramatically improved on the spelling.
Wow.
But I've noticed that his writing is dramatically improved too. And he seems to enjoy it more. Like once you taste a little success, it feeds that passion. So I think that's part of that whole thing and it goes. It's like a segue into this bliss out.
Because if you're miserable and you're failing at it every single day, you have to have some successes, something that brings you pleasure in it. And when you start, you're right, when you start to feel the success, then that becomes addictive. You want to, then it becomes pleasurable and enjoyable, you know?
Well, I think this quote, and actually the next one, so in this one, the big part about this is about you come to writing in any way that you need to, but not lightly. So you don't think that it's a casual thing. You have to whatever your routine is, you have to realize that when you sit down, you're about to disappear from everything else, and that has to be shut off. And whatever happens, if it doesn't work, if it does work, you're in that moment for a while. There's
you have to show up. You have to show up and be present.
There's a quote from who is it? I forget which writer it is, John McPhee or somebody. But he said, writing is easy. You sit down in front of the typewriter, you put in a piece of paper, and then you stare at the blank page until a bead of blood forms on your forehead.
Yeah, right. Or the one where it says that writing's easy. You sit down, you slash open your vein, and you bleed all over the page. I can't remember who said that.
I mean,
yeah, exactly.
I think that that's an interesting idea, but honestly, well, this ties to the reading thing. I don't know if I've had writer's block more than for 20 minutes in the last 23 years, because
oh my God, I want to kill you.
You read when you put in a lot of stuff comes out. My problem is the opposite. I write way too much, but the more that you put in, the more pours out. But when I am never more relaxed than when I am typing as fast as I can, whatever's coming out.
I will
I
say
think
this,
I think that's that bliss out. That's that idea of flow, where you get into a thing and you're flowing.
Because for me, the writer's block is around anxiety about the output. So for me, what happens is I sit down at the typewriter, and before I even write the first sentence, I'm like, what if this promotion doesn't work? Or I've got 45 pages to go, or this has to be the perfect headline. I don't think this is the perfect headline. And like the critic is already right on top of me,
right.
And so for me, I have to quiet all those voices. And your buddy Jen Stevens and we did the book Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott, and she's got this little great thing there where she talks about imagining sticking the critics in a jar, and she screws the lid on the jar, and you can hear their little voices screaming in there. But for me, what happens when I can do the slow thing is if I can do what you said, which is fall into the bliss of just looking at the sentence without worrying about whether the sentence is perfect, worrying how many more sentences I have to write, judging it. If I can just stay in the practice of it, like all you have to do is write. There's another.
There are two. Oh, sorry, I'm going to cut you off. There's a quote that we saw, and there's a quote that's coming up later. The quote that we saw was that good writing is often about letting go of the fear and affectation. Yes. And then the quote that's going to come up later is about writing the first draft with the door closed. Mm-hmm. I think that they're related, and we mentioned at the beginning of this call that Stephen King, one of the things that he really did very well in this book, and that must serve him in the other books that he writes, is that transparency thing, that he doesn't fake anything. He doesn't care what you think of him when he writes it. Right. I mean, of course he cares, because everybody who creates anything cares, and most people care what they're thought of. Everybody wants to be loved and respected. That's a fundamental driver behind almost anything that you'll do or sell or write. But in that idea of blissing out, in that moment, you are not doing that for anybody except for the pureness of the thing that you're producing. You don't care. You're not thinking. It's not that you're not thinking as a reader. You're not thinking. It's not that you're not thinking of a reader, because that's something we say in copy all the time too. Think of it.
But you're not worried about what the reader thinks of you.
You're that idea about passion. You're so passionate about the thing that you're working on, authentically passionate, that overrides the fear, and you're so confident about what you've done, which means doing all the research and
being prepared,
and being prepared, that gets over the affectation part. So, somebody, an executive writes a memo that's 4 paragraphs long about people congregating around the water cooler and how that has to stop. And when it's done, it's like you've read an Elizabethan poem, and you have to go back and read it again just to figure out what the hell he's talking about. That's only because he wants everybody to go, oh, he's an authoritative person that I must respect. At some level, he doubts that he has that authority, so he's pushing that.
He's not even sure he believes it either. Right.
So when you talk about blissing out, and when you're doing this stuff, you just have to get past that. You have to say, I'm just going to write the draft. I'm just going to get it out. And who cares? Nobody has to read it. I'll rewrite it before somebody else reads it, but I'm going to get it out on the page so I have something to look at.
And I think you have to be willing to take that leap. And this leads into this idea of the power of habit, because I think part of what gets you over that fear is when the habit of sitting down and writing at the same time every day becomes such a part of you that the fear almost doesn't get in the way because the habit is stronger than the fear. I was reading, there's a great book by the dancer Twyla Thorpe, I think is how you say it, called The Creative Habit. And she has this great piece where she's describing, I mean, she's been dancing for many, many years, right? And she's getting older, and they were sort of saying, how do you keep showing up, at the studio every day with your aches and your pains and your whatever? And she said, she was saying, I have this habit. And she kind of described her morning, I get up, I make my oatmeal, I do whatever. She said, I just know that every day at 6:15, I'm hailing the cab. And that's so, and she goes, and then I'm at the studio. Like, she has to make a conscious choice to write each day. And I do think that King, and it goes all through this book, but if anyone has made a habit of writing, in terms of number of pages or how he sits down to do it or doing it every day, I'm just amazed at the power of habit and how he uses it. And that's when I say, to me, Stephen King is sort of like describing writing like plumbing your sink. It's a job. You've got to get to work. You've got to do the writing. It's a job. This is not just some sort of artistic dilettante. Sit down and do the writing, Sure. Well,
there's there's a lot to be said for, I'm alluding to other books, but there's a book by J.D. Salinger, Franny and Zoe. And in that book, in that book, they're talking about another book called Pilgrim's Progress, where somebody is chanting all the time, and it talks about the virtue of repetition and getting into a moment where you keep it simple and you just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Right.
And that sounds boring, but what the case that they make in that book is that in that repetition you start to find the beautiful things, that you're awakened to them and you see them. I think that when you talk about habits, there's a book right now that I have in an audio book. I can't remember the title of it. By the way, I wanted to mention for anybody else that likes to do audiobooks, has an iPhone, etc. You go to Audible and you sign up for, it's $7 a month, and you get credits for audiobooks, and every month you get a book. If you're somebody who really reads, it's a great way to just pile up audiobooks. I have a backlog now, but one of the ones I have is about habits of writers and artists, just like what their day is. And I
love that one. I love that one. It's the one where it's like all these different people, right? It's like a little book, and each one is a one-page entry of this artist and that artist and this musician.
I don't know if that's it. I did see another book that's like that called The Writer's Desk. It's an older one, and it shows writing environments for everybody.
This one was a new one that was in brainpicking.org.
Oh yeah, that might be it, which is a great website, by the way.
Oh my God, I know, but I'm warning you, my Amazon account is like off the chain. I had to turn off that thing where you just hit automatic buy because I got my Amazon bill after I started reading Brain Pickings, and like every Sunday there would be $45 worth of books on that thing.
Well,
okay,
I think the big thing about that is that you do need whatever your personality is about, or whatever time it is that you're allotted, you really do need that time when you are blocked off, and that every day that you write something. I think Stephen King in the book says he writes maybe, I don't remember what the number word count was, 3,000 words a day.
Yeah, wasn't it like 10 pages, and he doesn't stop?
That's about 10, right, that's about 10 pages.
And he was like, if it's not done and it's midnight, I get it done. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I could do that.
Yeah, you just need to be in that thing. And what the weird thing that happens is when you have that habit, if you break it, if you break the chain, as the thing is, you you feel a little bit nervous. It's actually
it's
a bad feeling to feel that when you don't do it. Right. So and you feel good when you're doing it. But the productivity, that's what happens. There was one thing that I did.
You can't argue with his productivity. My God. I mean, I don't know. Somewhere I read, I can't remember. I don't think it's in this book where they added up basically all the pages of all of his novels because they're not small, right?
Right.
Like Jodi Picoult is another incredibly prolific writer and also popular fiction. And I remember she also has a really clear habit. She's like, I write a book a year, and then she like broke it down. She's like, the first 3 months are research, the second 3 months are the rough draft, the next 3 months are edit. Like she has this, and she like, again, approaches it like he does like a job. She's like, I start, and then she just does the job every day. But she also says in her blog, the thing about breaking the chain, or on her website, she also says that she writes every day, including, you know, Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, even if it's only for an hour, because she has almost a phobia about not writing on a day, because she is afraid that then it will snowball into the habit of not writing as opposed to the habit of writing, which
it connects to that fear and idea that you have to impress people with the stuff that you write, that once you let go of that, once you realize that you can write something and then throw it away, you don't have to keep it. Then it becomes easier to write something.
Be a jewel on the page.
Right.
Yeah.
I jotted down a couple of tips that I think would be valuable that kind of fall into that power of habit section.
Oh, good. Let's do that.
One of them is, you know, I mentioned that thing where we have our son write a journal entry. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we say to him when we have him write a journal entry is that we say, listen, if you don't know what to write, don't sit there not writing. Put the pen on the paper and write. I have no idea what to write. This is a terrible chore, sitting here trying to come up with something. I mean, I was doing this the other day, and I was telling my sister, Catherine, that I didn't know what to write, and she didn't even listen because she was doing something this. Oh, boy, my sister, Catherine. Anyway, you know, what happens is you get lost from that, get past it, and then you start writing something. I do that in copy all the time. I sit down and I say, what is it that I'm trying to say here? You know, and then I get into the copy.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great one. I have one similar, which is, have you ever read The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron?
No, but I think I actually have that in audio book lined up too.
So one of her things is she also says that you have to clear the brain clutter. So she does what's called morning pages, and when you said you don't have to keep it, you can throw it out. What you're supposed to do when you do her practice, and it's for artists, you're supposed to take an 8.5 by 11 legal pad. You're supposed to write 3 pages first thing in the morning, just like what you said, but it's more like my back is killing me. I'm really freaked out. We don't have the money for the electric bill. The dog ate my gym shoes. I'm fed up. I got a headache. I can't believe I got this project to do. And you just dump everything in your brain, right, for 3 full pages. Then you tear them out, throw them away, and start on your day as a way to, like, clear the slate.
Huh. That's interesting. Well, Hemingway used to say that you have to end the writing day on a point that was unfinished, because you need you need to be wake up the next morning desperate to get back to it. But there are just the 2 more, and those are really quick. One is a thing that's making the rounds right now. It's called the 2-minute rule. That's there are different interpretations
Say that again,
of it.
The 2-minute rule.
The 2-minute rule. There's one interpretation of it by the Get Things Done people that says, if it takes you only 2 minutes to do, go ahead and do it right now. But I saw another interpretation of it which I like better, which is, don't think about you're about to sit down and do 8 hours or 10 hours of writing or 4 hours. I really think 4 hours of solid writing is a good block. But sit down and say, I'm just going to do 2 minutes of writing before I do anything else. I'm not going to answer email. I'm not going to call anybody. I'm not going to have a meeting. I'm just going to do 2 minutes of writing and see what happens. Because within that 2 minutes, your bliss meter
will
kind of
kick
kicks in. Yeah.
Yep.
And it doesn't always, but it almost always does. So
there's a saying in AA which is great, which is you can do anything for 2 minutes, which you would find intolerable if you had to do it for 10.
Right.
This idea of just living it in 2-minute increments. Anything is possible for 2 minutes, right?
Right. And the other thing is, I bet everybody on here is familiar with that Gene Schwartz idea of the 33-minute timer.
I love that. And Deutsch is always yelling at me because David's like, that's just because he didn't have a fancy timer. You realize you should just do 30 minutes. I'm like, no, it's like Mojo. It's 33:33. I don't care that my timer isn't stuck on a 3. I'm like, that's the Gene Schwartz time, 33:33.
Yeah, I know. It's I did that for a while too, but now I have. This is the second tip. I'm sure this is available on a PC for PC people. I'm on a Mac, so I use a program called Pomodoro Timer, and it sits up in the
Pomodoro Timer. Can you spell that so people can catch that?
Pomodoro is Pomodoro.
Okay.
And there's a whole story with why it's called Pomodoro, which I don't actually remember right now. But it has something to do with tomatoes. Anyway, so it sits up in the menu bar, and you tell it how long each block of work, which is a Pomodoro set, is supposed to be, and how many you want to do in a day. So I have it set so each block is 30 minutes. Every 30 minutes, I get a 5-minute break, and then it starts another 30 minutes, and I try and do 8 a day.
That's great.
So, often with like the interruptions and things like that, and you can pause it and start it.
Right.
Interruptions can stretch it out, but it plays a ticking sound, which would drive, I'm sure, some people crazy. You can turn the ticking sound off. I let it play, even though I listen to music while I work. And it keeps me working. And when I want to stop and waste time, I look at the timer and go, I've only got 7 minutes left on this thing. I'll do it during the break.
That's great. Yeah, that's
what
great.
almost always happens is I write through the breaks too.
Right, because then you get caught up and you get another wind, and then you keep going.
Right.
Yeah.
It just keeps you going. And there are dozens and dozens of free and cheap versions of this timer app for PC and Mac, and I think it's a good idea to just kind of goad you along, and it forces you to take that habit. So that you say to yourself, as long as I get in 8 Pomodoros a day, I'm okay.
Right. Yeah, then I've done it's like what Stephen King says. Did you show up and you did the work, right?
Right.
You showed up and you did your work. That's just, I love, and so many of the books that we've read over the course of this first year, it makes me think also of the book, Do the Work, and The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, And in there, I forget which one, I think it's The War of Art, Stephen Pressfield says, you don't see like a truck driver go, I don't know, I'm just not feeling inspired today. I don't think I can drive the truck. Like, no, he gets his ass up, he has breakfast, grabs his coffee, gets in the truck, and does the route. He's like, well, that's how you got to approach your writing,
That would be a funny skit. Guy, I just have driver's block, and the guy's sitting in
we're
the.
Going to make you. Denise is now going to sign you up to do that at boot camp.
Right.
One will be the rider. You be the truck driver. I'll be the rider. I'll have angst. I'll wander around. I'll look for inspiration. You'll be driving the truck. So we have time. I think if you can hang in there a few more minutes, I was going to say, is there one more? I'm tempted to go to Kill Your Darlings because I sort of think of this as being Stephen King's thing in this book because of all of the revision rules he shows you. But I know we also have storytelling and planting a sense of something and big ideas. Is there one of those you'd like to end on?
Let's see. I think the thing about I actually would like to say something about storytelling, which I had just heard.
Okay.
Which this is something that Bill Bonner just said to me, and last week we were at a writing thing, and Bill was a mentor of mine, is a mentor of mine, and we were delivering a presentation together to some marketers on copywriting. And he was talking about storytelling, and I said, we had done this book about the great leads, 6 great leads.
I remember that.
one
and
of those.
folks can still get that through AWAI. That's a great book.
One of the things in that thing was that about a lead that's built on a story. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I thought was great about in this book was, of course, this is Stephen King, so he's talking about how to tell a story, and the way that he tells a story and figures out who the characters are. And I think he was talking about Carrie and how he was trying to figure out what it was like to be a teenage girl who's going through all the things that teenage girls go through, and what it's like to be awkward and all that stuff, and how he really had to get in the head of the people that he was writing to. And then when he sits down in the story, he starts with that character and puts him in an interesting situation and sees what happens. Well, what Bill said was, he said, I think that that's true that all those lead types, they do exist, but really the biggest one is story. And in fact, maybe all lead types are a variation on telling a story, because what you're really doing is you're taking a prospect and you are making that prospect the hero of his own story. Yeah. And that's kind of like where there's something, there's one of these quotes in here that's talking about getting into the skin. Description begins, well, this is actually a planning sense of something, that the description begins in the writer's imagination but should finish in the reader's. And I had just kind of jotted down a note, and it's really, I think what happens is you have to know what's in that person's mind already. And the description is just you trying to take what's in somebody else's mind and find a way to put it out there in front of them so they can see it and go, aha, that's exactly how I felt. Right. And that idea in a persuasion sense is that you're looking at what that character wants to have happen, what change you're going to affect for them. Because obviously if you're selling something, you're promising a change for them. And it has to be something that they want or they're not going to buy. So you're figuring out what would make that person feel like a hero in their own story. And then you're telling the story that they can go, aha, that's exactly how I want to feel. I want to be the guy.
Instead of telling them how to feel, you're just letting them enter into a character and experience that success for themselves through the arc of the character.
Right. I want to be the guy that sits down at the piano and everybody laughs at me, and then I play something and everybody says, that's amazing. So anyway, I thought that was a very big point. When you think about everything that you were writing in copy or communicating in any way in writing, is that you're really trying to create a story. The story is just a context for that reader to live in and see that something can be changed for the better.
And it can be, there's so many ways you can tell the story. You can tell the story as a discovery story. I'm thinking now about some of the health writing I do, right? So sometimes it can be the story of the guy who discovered it, and sometimes it can be the story of the person who used the cure and ended their suffering, and sometimes it can be the story of the guy who becomes a doctor because there was no cure for his mother, and so it becomes his mission to find one so no one will have to suffer like she did. I mean, there's so many ways, there's so many story ways to enter into a particular piece of copy, like you said, that I agree with Bill. I could see where you could argue that really all leads are stories. And I also think that if you think of it that way, it's tapping into what we say all the time at AWAI, and we've talked about this a lot, this idea that we're hardwired for stories. That is our birth language, our native tongue. And so if you couch anything you're writing in the form of a story, that's what you remembered. I mean, when we started this call, I was saying, when I went back and I picked up this book after not having read it for several years, the scenes that came to my mind were not necessarily a specific copy lesson. The first thing I remembered was him walking on the side of the road and the guy in the pickup truck with the hound dog trying to break into the cooler, and he's smacking the dog. And Stephen King, it's right before he's hit, and Stephen King looks up and he has this line. He says, I thought to myself, I'm going to be killed by a character out of one of my novels. And like that whole story of him walking and the description of the guy in the pickup truck, that was in my mind. And the whole part where when you talked about him being honest, right, and being such a brutal writer, where he talks about his drug habit, and he describes writing and his wife coming in, and he's been doing so much, I think it was cocaine, that blood is pouring out of his nose, and he's describing the piles of tissues in the wastebasket next to his desk. Like, those are the things that I remembered from the book, because I remembered his stories, right, and his descriptions.
Right.
And I think that is why we write in terms of story, because it is what we are hardwired for.
Right, but it does, I know we're running low on time, but it does connect back to a thing where he says you have to know how much, this is about description, he says about how much to tell, how much story to tell. He doesn't tell this. He doesn't tell the story for any reason except that it fits. He doesn't tell it because he wants you to be impressed that he used to do a lot of cocaine, or to feel sorry for him because he did a lot of cocaine, or anything like that.
You're right.
He just tells it, and he's like, and then this happened, so that happened.
Right.
That's all, which is, I think, a very big part of knowing how to tell a story. When you start worrying about what people think.
We need to know about the story. You know, like, we didn't need to know where the toothless guy bought the truck. We just needed to enter the story at the part where he's about to run over Stephen King.
Right. Just another very quick thing I'm going to squeeze in. On the Kill Your Darling pigs, I have another tip.
Oh, good. We got to go to Kill Your Darling, because that's one of my people are going to think we sound brutal here, but I think this is one of the most important lessons in this book.
I just want to say an easy way to kill your darlings. This is like 15 ways to drown your children or something. But
oh my God! Now I can see the responses coming in now.
Right. You don't actually have to kill them. You just send them to summer camp, which is what I wrote down. I open another document, and then I lie to myself. I say, I'll just take this out now, and I'll probably put it back in or use it somehow later.
I totally do the same thing. Every project has a cuts page, and you can put anything on the cuts page because it's still saved.
It's like a miscellaneous drawer, and it's like, I'll save this for the Lift Notes. I'll save this for a sidebar or something like that.
Yes.
But it makes it very easy to put it away. And unlike the miscellaneous box, it's the miscellaneous box in your closet, but unlike the box, it doesn't take up any space. So,
and I think the more one of the first lessons I learned, and I'm glad we're ending with this one because this one means a lot to me too. This was one of the hardest things for me to learn because I would work at a headline and an opening, and I would obsess, and I would craft it, and I'd spend days on it, and I'd send it to Paris, and he'd be like, no, I don't think that's working, try this. And I'd be like, no. But the sooner I got over it, and the sooner I learned not to get attached to anything, the more I could make room for the even better thing. And now my other trick with Kill Your Darlings is I say to myself, oh, this isn't working. That means there's something better that's coming. You know, the sort of myth I convince myself that, you know, if I drown this child, the next one will be so much better and easier to take care of.
Yeah, sure. You can always make another.
Oh my God, that was good. We're really going to be in trouble now.
Can I leave you with one thing? Is that there's a slide toward the end that says write with the door closed, and then rewrite with the door open, because I've been thinking about it a lot since I reread the book. One of my favorite writers is William Styron.
Yeah.
And William Styron was a book on depression, but he was talking about writing, and he was saying that there are two kinds of writers. There are writers that write a line, then they go back and fix the line, and then they write the next line, and then they go back and fix both the lines, then they write the next line, and they go back and fix the line, etc. That's one kind. That's the kind of writer that William Styron said he was. And he said, then there are other writers that just pour it all out, and then they go back and they rewrite it. And he said the second kind of writer loves writing. The first kind of writer wants to die. And Styron was he tried to commit suicide, and he was a manic depressive and all this other stuff.
Right.
I do think that that's something, it always comes back to me when I'm working on something. You know, I'm never more happy than when I'm just pouring out a lot of stuff. I get stuff done.
Yeah.
And when I'm done, I am pour a glass of wine or something. I'm nicer to my family, you know, and more pleasant at night, and I'm more relaxed if we end up watching TV or something like that. But when I waste all day niggling around, like procrastinating the worst, but if I waste all day trying to rewrite a paragraph over and over and over again, even if the paragraph ends up beautiful, I'm miserable. I'm useless for the rest of the day. So I think that if you can be that kind of writer that just dumps it out with the door closed, you know, you don't care.
And what David says to me, too, is that he can tell when I'm doing that because I will fall more natural into a conversational tone, in a relaxed way of writing.
Sure.
He's like, when you start going sentence to sentence, that's when you are like constipated on the page. He's like, I can feel how much effort you're putting into this. But when you oh, I can feel that too, you know?
Sure. Speed and momentum comes across in the writing.
Yeah. Yep. Well, we are a little past time. I want to thank you for hanging in there with us, John, and going a little over. As you can tell, there's so much from this book. We could just keep going for hours on this. I really have enjoyed having you as a guest here. I hope that are we going to see you at AWAI boot camp again this year?
You are. I'm actually going to miss my daughter's birthday to be there.
Oh,
I know we're considering changing. We're considering changing the dates of boot camp in the future, Marcella.
Well, you can't win either way, Denise. My birthday's in November, so you get squeezed. And I know Mark's birthday is in there somewhere too, isn't it?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I remember the infamous year of the Congo line. Who could forget Mark's birthday?
That's right. No, so I will be there without the family, unfortunately, because they're still going to be in school. But I'll be there.
I forget, that's right, because you have a whole different calendar probably over there. Although still here too, most kids are in school. Although now they're starting all these winter breaks and all this crazy schedule. Well, I'm really glad that you could join us on the call, and I'm sure folks will look forward to seeing you at boot camp for more of your fantastic writing advice. There were so many good tips on this call that people can incorporate right away, and I just really want to thank you. I know it's probably 10 o'clock at night there. You're in the middle of your family time. I really appreciate you taking the time to call in and do this with us. I really enjoyed doing this.
Sure, it was fun. I was kind of glad to go through that book again and just rediscover stuff that I'd forgotten. So.
Yeah, that's why I started the book club with, when Katie asked me if I would do this, I said yes, because I need to reread these again too, because I always get something out of it that helps me. You know, it's definitely gives me as much as I give back to it. So I want to thank everybody for listening in, and say that
Marcella,
I will also.
I'm going to interrupt. I'm just going to interrupt to say thank you. Thank you for hosting all of these sessions. We know that folks will listen to these recordings time and again, especially when they go back to read it for the first time, or, as you say, in rereading it. So you've been a terrific host. You've had great guests, and we are all very grateful for that.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure, and it's been a great year. I've really loved going through these books together, and I've loved the variety of guests and books and topics covered. I certainly am a better writer because of it, and I hope that will be true for our listeners also. We'll talk to you later. Thanks, John. Thanks, Denise.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Bye.